Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this wide world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Zambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is David J.P. Fisher. David is an internationally recognized keynote speaker, sales trainer, business coach, and what he's focused on is bringing the human touch back into sales, social media, networking, and entrepreneurship. David is an author of several books related to networking and selling. Specifically, he's written a book called Hyper-Connected Selling, Winning More Business by Leveraging Digital Influence and Creating Human Connection. He's also written a series of books related to networking called Networking in the 21st Century. And thirdly, he's also written a book of haikus, which we get into briefly in my conversation with David in just a couple of minutes. So David and I got connected, and I wanted to have him on the show because of his focus on using networking and LinkedIn to build relationships and trust. So we've certainly talked in previous episodes in the podcast around how to use LinkedIn from a very tactical standpoint. Having David on the show is really creating a foundation of the human side of why do networking, what to do when you to establish a relationship and build a real relationship with the people that you're meeting at conferences, with the people that are coming into your website, to the people that are getting introduced to you. Because David has focused his entire career on how to leverage networking and social platforms as a means to build relationships and grow sales. So I think a lot of us, when you hear the word networking, it sort of has this sort of like weird, like, I don't know if I want to do it feeling. In fact, in the episode, in the conversation with David, we use the term icky, networking. I don't want to do a networking. It feels kind of icky to go do networking. And I think it's gotten a bad rap for good reason. I think it's been overblown and it's been used the wrong way. And that's exactly why I wanted to have David on the show, because in our conversation, we talk about the importance of building trust and relationships and how the investment of time that you make in building real relationships far supersedes the cost that you'll feel from making those connections. So I think a lot of us, oftentimes you feel like, well, I've got all these automation platforms. I can send out blast emails. I can send out automated LinkedIn connection requests. I can, do a dial by phone system. I've got all these automations that allow me to reach thousands of people really, really quickly. And let's face it, the pressure's on, right? You're out there, you're trying to grow your company, you're trying to grow revenue, you're trying to get new customers really, really quickly. And so the pressure's on to reach a lot of the market at once. So by default, we go to use these automated tools. What's missing though, in using those automated tools is building real relationships with your prospects, with your customers that are actually going to allow you to advance sales more quickly. And so that's the crux of what David and I talked about in our conversation. A couple of the key topics that we talked through. Number one, we kicked off the conversation talking about his book of haikus and his participation in slam poetry competitions in Chicago. So I thought that was a really interesting way to start off the conversation. And both of those have really specific lessons as it relates to going out and doing your prospecting, doing your selling, doing your networking. So definitely want to listen to that in the first couple of minutes of the conversation. After that, we dug into some really specific sales topics. One, we talked about his concept of being a sales Sherpa, why it's important to bring your customers through their journey and use information that they already have access to, but make sure that they understand what that information means to them, what it means to their company. There's no shortage of information. And in fact, the bigger challenge is that there might be too much information, which then creates paralysis for our customers. They end up not making a decision at all or not making any changes, let alone losing a deal to a competitor. So we talked about the importance of being a sales Sherpa. We talked about in your sales, especially as a startup, when you're selling to your market and you're replacing a manual process or replacing spreadsheets or replacing SharePoint, your customers don't know what they're looking for. They don't have a model. They don't have a framework in their mind as to what the product should be, what the solution should look like. And again, as a sales Sherpa, it's our job to be able to help them understand what they should be looking for. And ultimately, then the product itself is not where the selling happens. In fact, the product and the demo is the place where you provide credibility around the sale that has already taken place. So we've talked a lot about that in the conversation in just a couple of minutes. We talked about the value of relationships and that trust is a spectrum right? It's not just somebody trusts you or they don't trust you. And specifically, David brought up the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is showing that trust across the board is going down. Trust in government, trust in companies, trust, universally has gone down, except the one place where trust is going up is through our personal connections. And we talked about why that's important when it comes to selling. And then we talked about how to get tactical. So if we decide that, hey, we want to go this route and we want to leverage relationships, we want to do a better job in networking and building better trust with the people that we work with, then how do we actually do it? And he gave us some really specific tactical tips on how you can do this starting today. You can do it today with the list of people that you're contacting. You can do it tomorrow with the next conference that you're going to. You can do it next week if you're going to some meetup group or some other organization, physical meetup where you're going to be meeting new people. What specifically can you do to start doing a better job of building relationships so that so that you're creating human-to-human contact and connections, not just transactional-based selling. So those are just a couple of the topics to listen for. Really enjoyed my conversation with David. He's very generous with his time and his expertise. I definitely recommend picking up a copy, especially the book Hyper Connected Selling. As I mentioned in the podcast at the end, we kind of walked through the book a little bit, and I think it's a really nice handbook for you as an individual. If you're thinking about what does that playbook look like? Why is this important? And if you need to translate and transfer those thoughts to your team, then this book can be a good guideline, a good baseline for you and your team to use to really add the credibility behind when you tell your salesperson, hey, I want you to do a better job building relationships. Well, what does that mean? Why is that important? How do I do it? I think this could be a good book for you and your team to use. So that's the intro. You could probably tell from my voice, I'm just pretty stoked to have David on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation. He and I are tried and true old world sales dudes, going back a couple of decades, even before we had email. We joked in our podcast prep call how both of us had a beeper and a calling card, and that's how we'd go to a payphone if we had to call a customer, and that was considered modern back then. So I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation with David. So without any further ado, let's head over to my conversation with David J.P. Fisher. David J.P. Fisher.
In the house.
In the house. Raise the roof. And we can just date ourselves.
We did, but we won't tell anybody, and then it's all right.
Most of the people won't even know what that means, so that's okay. It's all good, man. Dude,
that's
really
how you know the cool kids are. Yeah, good to be seen.
The cool kids don't know what it means to raise the roof. That's how we know who the cool kids are. We're not one of them, because we do know what it means to raise the roof.
Yeah, exactly. Welcome to my home office / nursery.
Dude, that's totally understandable. I have a home office, no nursery. I have a 7.5-year-old now. So he requires different forms of, he needs the rest of the house. I get the office, he gets the rest of the house. That's his domain. He just allows me to live here. I'm allowed to live here.
That's a win, because right now my son gets everything. This room, that room, everything is his. So
yeah,
I'll eventually get it back.
Well, that's our bet. We figure, we got about 11 more years and then he's off to college. So then we'll get the house back.
There you go.
It'll probably get worse before it gets better, but it's all good, dude. I'm really stoked to have you on the program. I've been doing lots of different angles of research, trying to figure out the right way to start. And so what I thought we'd do is just ask you a question I like to ask everyone who joins us here is, when people ask you what you do, how do you answer that question? Because for somebody like you, you probably have like 20 things on the list. Mm-hmm. So just to set the tone for the people listening, what
depends how many beers I've had that night. Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable going in whatever direction you want, and I run my own podcast, so I know what it's like being on your side of the Zoom. So whatever I can do to make it a good show for you, and give your listeners good info, I'm cool with going along that path.
Well, I appreciate that, and you're really great about sharing. You've written. Maybe I'll try to describe what you do, and you can tell me where I've missed. So I sort of like make it simple. You're author, speaker, sales coach. Is that the easiest way to describe what you do?
Probably the easiest way. That sums up the big buckets for sure.
And so would you put it in that order? Would you consider yourself an author first, a speaker first, or a coach first?
It's a really good question. If I drill down, I'd probably say that I'm a coach first, because both the speaking and the writing really come from a place of that coaching conversation, whether that's through a book as the medium or standing in front of 500 people. I still kind of have that coach teacher mentality. And, my goal is to try to give people some tools, some tactics, and some perspective that they can use to get through their day a little more effectively, whether it means to sell more easily, take some of the stress off, or, just have a little more fun.
Well, then let's start there with the coaching piece, because, I mentioned that you're an author. You've written several books. You've got several versions of a book, networking in the 21st century. So you have one that's networking in the 21st century on LinkedIn, one for sales professionals, one for solopreneurs and freelancers, why your network sucks and what to do about it. So there's 4 different versions of that. And then you've got the hyper-connected selling book.
Sales Sherpa playbook is coming out next year. So,
and lest we not forget the 575.
I love that book.
Daily Glimpse of Chicago. So before we get into the sales stuff, I absolutely wanted to ask you, how does one come to write a book of haikus? So it's, for people listening, the book is 575, A Daily Glimpse of Chicago Life as Seen Through Haiku.
Yeah, it's the very long story short is I've been a poet for years. I used to be a slam poet here in Chicago, competed, actually won here in the birthplace of slam poetry at the Green Mill Lounge in Chicago, which is where it was created. And really loved that part of my life. And I write a lot. And you can get really tired of writing nonfiction business books, and needed to access the creative side. Did not have a lot of time. And so I was like, you know what? I can write a haiku. I mean, that's 17 syllables. That I can handle, not a full-blown poem, but it's a haiku. And I gave myself a mission to do it once a day for a month. And at the end of the month, I was like, hey, if I do this for a year, that'd be a pretty interesting book. So that's where it came from. And I did one a day, did not miss a day for a year. And it was actually a pretty eventful year. Some good things happened, some not so good things happened in my life. And so it was very kind of cathartic and kind of a journal, but it's also a great way to look at the city through hopefully a different lens.
Well, I mean, the concept of going a full year, the 4 seasons of the year. I mean, obviously there's the natural cycle of the world in 4 seasons. So you have different perceptions. Chicago is very seasonal. But then I think there's the metaphorical sense of going through a full year of seasons, right? I mean, we all go through ups and downs, no matter where you are in your life. And I think it's a really unique way to express that. Obviously, haikus they're short. It doesn't mean they're easy to write.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that you had a background in writing poetry. So I think I know what slam poetry is. I'm not 100% sure. So how would you describe slam poetry?
So slam poetry was kind of invented here in Chicago in, I believe it was the mid to late 80s. And it was an attempt to take poetry back from the overly academic, elite, rarefied airs. And it was invented by a guy named Mark Smith here in Chicago, who was I think he was a construction worker who then kind of became a poet. So it has that very kind of working class ethos to it, and it's a competition. It's spoken word, so it's not just written. You go up there and you perform, and it's voted on by the audience basically. And I mean, the winner at the weekly shows wins $10, right, or maybe 15. So it's not big bucks, but it's really interesting because it really challenged you as both a writer and a presenter, a performer, to get up in front of a really tough crowd. And I mean, because they'll let you know, they'll boo you off in 30 seconds.
Really? So, I mean, the audience is like, they're trained to not be courteous if they don't feel.
Oh gosh, no, they start snapping.
Okay.
And if they're snapping, that doesn't mean it's good. Yeah, okay. That means this is boring. You better get better real fast. And I may have seen people cry off the stage. I mean, that's not necessarily a good thing to make somebody cry, but it'll make you step your game up for sure.
Interesting. Did you ever cry off the stage? Am I allowed to ask you that question?
You are. I did not. I think I took second 4 or 5 times, right? Because it's kind of like a process of elimination, and that one's tough when you just come that close. And I was not in good moods after a couple of those. But there's a saying that the best poem always loses. But that's just what all the loser poets say, or the people that, not loser poets, but the people that lose say to make themselves feel better. Yeah, but I was definitely bummed. But that made the win that much more sweet.
Thanks for sharing that, because we've had people on the show that have done stand-up comedy. I've talked about doing stand-up comedy, and it's in that sort of genre, right, where you're just putting yourself out there. There's really no prize, obviously. I mean, you can do a comedy competition, but they're even, pretty rare. And it's just about you saying, I want to do this, and I want to perform, and I want to entertain people. And you don't necessarily, I guess you could get booed off stage in a comedy club, but it's more of the deafening silence that people talk about when you're up there.
Right.
and the skit or the set is not working, and you're 30 seconds in, you realize you got 4.5 minutes left, and you're like, oh,
and
man.
they're just staring at you. They're just
staring. So that's the comedy club equivalent of snapping. I think maybe I'd rather have the snapping, because at least I don't know.
I think silence is better, because snapping is like an active, we don't like what you're doing. And it's kind of like that. Come on, let's go. Move things along. And I did get snapped off once, and it was pretty awful.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, man, I think that's in a lot of ways, it might not seem like a healthy backdrop for what I really want to talk to you about, which is the concept of networking in the 21st century and hyper-connected selling. But just the fact of your discipline of doing this haiku every day.
Oh,
and
for sure.
Then
it's
putting yourself,
connected.
obviously, put yourself in a situation to do these slam poetry contests. You're putting yourself out there in front of a bunch of strangers, and you're saying, like, this is what I do. This is what I've created. Is this acceptable to you as a message or as an audience, right? And that's really, if you think about it at the core, that's what we're doing. Like, that's a lot of what the fundamental push that's required to go and do any kind of selling is
100%.
Go out there with your message and do it in front of a bunch of strangers, and be disciplined enough to keep going, even if you're getting the snaps, or even if it's, Sunday afternoon in February and it's 3 feet of snow outside, you don't feel like writing a haiku, or maybe that's the perfect time.
Hey, I took a lot of what I learned in selling and actually took it into those, what would seem creative pursuits. And you wouldn't think there's a connection. For me, there's always been, I was in a band for a long time. I always saw this connection between sales and coaching and relationships and creativity and rejection. When you study Buddhism, you realize it's all connected.
Everything's connected. It's all, I'm with you on that. So maybe we can dig in a little bit. So if you're okay with it, I'll talk about hyper-connected selling and network in the 21st century. And maybe you could just help define, what do you mean by hyper-connected century or selling? And what is the difference between that book and the 21st century selling?
Yeah. So,
or networking in the 21st century.
Yeah. So I started writing the networking books because that's actually how I built my business, was strictly through relationships. Right. And, this is going back almost 15 years now, but I didn't really know a lot about what I was doing, a lot about marketing, but I knew I came from a sales background. So I knew how to sell and how to meet people. So I just started going to events, started introducing myself, go and have that proverbial cup of coffee. Did that a lot. Got to know the coffee houses around my place pretty well. And so when I started really writing down kind of how I built, or the skills I was using to build my business, and I was speaking on this a lot, it was really looking at those kind of relationship building, old school human relationship building skills, which I really think networking gets a bad rap because people think it's this very transactional. You go to this networking event with some name tags, bad appetizers, and somehow business is going to happen from that. And that's not the case at all. It really is about establishing a relationship, finding ways to have points of contact with people, finding ways to help them. And in fact, I was an early guy who jumped on LinkedIn. So that was why I started training people on that, because for me, it was all put together, right? Whether it was going to a networking event, meeting somebody on LinkedIn, sharing content, reaching out to people, having a cup of coffee. So that was kind of the basis. And then when I really kind of looked at what was happening in the sales world, or at least from my perspective, the very transactional way of selling that was very prevalent in kind of the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s, really by the time we got to 2000, was going away because technology made information accessible to our customers and prospects in a way that it never had been before, right? So if you were just trying to act in a very transactional way, you were out of touch. So for me, the hyper-connected world is really a world where we're all connected through technology, to information, to people, to resources, to opinions, to perspectives. And as a salesperson, you have to operate within that environment. 20 years ago, a salesperson's job was to send their brochure and then say, hey, did you read it? Would you like to buy from me? Now, I call it being a sales Sherpa in a hyper-connected world. Now it's, you have all the information. You know where you want to go, but you might not have taken that journey before, and I can help you do that. I can help you make that buying journey easier, faster, and come to a better, more effective decision with less potential for mistake. So that's kind of the view. So at this point, salespeople have to understand the online world. They have to have that digital brand. They have to have better empathy and communication skills to develop that trust, right? Because we have to trust our guides. And it can't just be, I'm going to just make a bunch of phone calls and hopefully somebody will say yes. So that was kind of a mouthful, but those are kind of the distinctions between those two books, but also I think the connection between the two.
Well, the concept of the sales Sherpa is something I wanted to ask you about, so I'm glad you brought that up, because you mentioned, when you said you have the information, you're speaking of the prospects, like the buyers out there. There's all the information, and the data supports that. I've seen numbers as high as, buyers make 70% of the purchasing decision before they ever talk to a salesperson. And part of that is just the proliferation of marketing and proliferation of just email and information just getting shared, right? Well, email helps too. But the concept of it's not about, like you said, here's the information, here's the brochure. What do you think? I'm not carrying the information. You mentioned this in terms of like assembling the information into almost like a story that aligns with that customer's journey and where that customer needs to go.
Right.
Is that
exactly.
a fair way to think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you think about how you, on a personal basis, buy these days, like if you're going to buy a big ticket item, a big television, a car, a house, you don't have to ask anybody for the information. You can go online and find everything you want, but you still might not be comfortable making that decision. You still might not know what are the right questions to ask. In hyper-connected selling, I talk about real estate specifically because people don't buy a lot of houses over their life. It's a pretty big decision. But yeah, you could technically just go online and find, the MLS listing and go, that house is $200,000. I'll buy it, or $1 million, depending on where you live. But so what does a real estate salesperson do? They go, hey, I know what are the right questions to ask, how to help you decide what you really need from your house, maybe steer you away from some mistakes you could make, some of the pitfalls, and maybe show you some opportunities. That's what that real estate agent, a good one, does. And I think that if we flip this around and look into it, especially on a B2B level, sales are still human to human. You have that buyer who maybe has not purchased something in your category before. They don't know where they could go wrong, what they should be looking for. You walk in and you become that guide for them, which might be you saying, hey, we're not for you, right? We're not going to solve the problem that you really have. But it very much might be, hey, the problem that you really have, we are the perfect solution. And here's why. And you've built that trust with them, they're going to listen.
I like something you said there about, especially for our audience, because a lot of the people listening to the show are at startups. And so they're selling a new product that's either replacing a manual process or replacing some old outdated system, or replacing spreadsheets and Excel and SharePoint. And you said that people don't know what they're looking for, right? So we just got a coaching call this morning, and one of the, we were talking about the outbound prospecting, and the client I was working with said, I sent out this message, this is what we do. And somebody replied back and it's like, oh, we're good. We do this right now. And my client was saying, well, John is saying, but that's the reason why I started the company, because they're doing that. Like, they need to stop doing that and start doing what we do. So the exact reason why the prospect thinks that they're good is exactly the reason why they should talk to me. And I said, well, that's the point. Like, that's why what you're doing, selling as a startup, is so hard, because people don't have a mental model. They think they're good, with whatever option they're using, and they've got it covered, but they don't know what they're looking for. And so we need to create a messaging and almost like a path to help that prospect say, oh, yes, I understand that's what you're using. That's why we started the company. Maybe I could send you a case study and explain it to you, or maybe I could do a 60-second short demo. Like, this is what we do, and this is why people in your situation like what we do. Because they don't have that, they don't know, if somebody's never seen the color blue, you try to describe a color to somebody who's never seen color, right? You can't do it.
Yep.
And I think that's a critical point that you just said.
And to even go farther into that point, because I think it's such a valuable issue that, especially as you said, in the startup world, the founder, and this is really definitely with founders and early stage sales reps, but basically anybody who's trying to sell into a startup space, you mentioned the demo. Hey, can I give you a demo? I always when I'm working with clients, say your demo is not how you sell. Your demo is where you provide credibility for what you said when you sold. And to your point, that mental model, I love that phrase you just used there, because your job, if you're selling into those spaces, you've got something new, something novel, something different. Your job is not to go, hey, look at my cool dashboard that we have that's going to automate this process. Your job is actually to connect on that human level, right? And say, hey, I'm an expert in this area. I want to be somebody who's a resource. I want to be somebody that you can trust. Let's build that. So then I can say, hey, by the way, I'm oversimplifying this, but I know you're doing these spreadsheets on Excel that take you, 5 hours a week to do. What if you could do that in, 20 minutes on this cloud platform that we've built? At that point, then the prospect's going to listen to you. But if you just go in there going, hey, I've got this cool platform. Okay, Scott, thanks so much. Yeah, we got that covered. We already do that in our organization.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to get to that piece in terms of the trust in a minute. There's a couple other things that I wanted to dig into a little bit. You mentioned about the demo, and I'm probably going to mess up exactly what you said, but the demo you said provides credibility for the sale that's already taken place.
Well,
did I paraphrase that correctly?
It's how you I always see the demo as how you back up what you said to them in a conversation prior.
Got it.
Like, the demo doesn't sell for you. I mean, this is my opinion. And I know there's a lot of people who disagree with it. The demo doesn't sell. The demo is just, you're having a conversation and you say, hey, we can shave 4.5 hours off of your week. All right. Then you go, here's a demo of how that actually happens. If you're going to sell somebody a hammer, you just could start hitting things, or you could frame it for them, change their mental model, and then go, oh, by the way, let me show you the hammer doing what I just said it's going to do. Boom. All of a sudden that person's now actually engaged. So I just see way too many salespeople rely on their demo as the selling piece, and that's just not it.
Well, I think, if you haven't, even people that are well-trained salespeople, I've worked with 20-year enterprise salespeople, and they're like, oh, we just got to get them in the demo. And they're jamming in the demo, like you said, thinking that the demo is going to sell. And whether it's because they're being lazy, they don't know better, or the product team has sort of sold the sales team that, like, hey, we built this product so well that if you just show it, the clients, they're going to get it. Like, oh, great, let's go jam them in the demo. But what you've articulated, I think, is really critical in any sale, right? It's about, is there a problem? Does everybody want that thing solved? Are they problem aware? And like you said, like, okay, yes, getting that admission that, yes, okay, if I could go from 5 hours to 20 minutes, sure, I'd love to do that. Just like that simple statement then opens the door for a sale to take place. But before that admission is even verbalized, before that, if you show the demo before that, all you're doing is pushing the product without getting the prospect to say, yeah, there's something here.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. We are off and running in my conversation with David J.P. Fisher. Listen, I'm really excited that you're listening to the podcast. Thank you so much for being a listener. And one of the things that I always want to make sure that you know is how important it is for us here at Sales Quality to help you be successful. The mission of our company is to help 100 startups over the next 10 years to reach $10 million in annual recurring revenue. Those are big numbers. 100 startups in 10 years doing $10 million in annual recurring revenue. How does that work? Well, that comes to $1 billion impact. If we can make $1 billion impact in the startup world over the next decade, it makes me feel like we're actually doing something really important here. So one of the ways that we want to help make that impact is by sharing a copy of my latest book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. ramp up your B2B startups, repeatable revenue with a Q framework. So if you are running a startup and you feel like you're hustling and hardworking and efforting your way through your day, through your week, through your month, through your year, and instead you need to start scaling your sales process, then I think you're really, really going to like this book. So the easiest way to get a copy of this book, there's a completely free version, free PDF download of the entire book available on my website, salesqualia, sales, Qualia.com. So if you go to salesqualia.com, there's a black strip banner thing in the middle. I don't know what marketing people call it. There's a button that says start reading now. Click that, throw in your email address, and we will send you a full version, a full complete copy of Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. So that's it for now. That's all. Let's head back to my conversation with David J.P. Fisher. The second thing that I wanted to dig into, and then I do want to get into the trust and the networking side of the conversation. You mentioned about information collection, and like I was almost imagining in my mind, like assembling these disparate pieces of information about the product or the solution, and you use the real estate market. And I think that's an analogy that I think is a good one, because like you can go online and see, okay, this is 3 beds, 2 baths, 2,000 square feet. It's got all of the features of the house. It's electric. It's, 1 story. It's got this kind of roof that backs up to an agricultural field and all these things. And on the surface, I'm like, I got all the information I need about this house. But then a real estate agent will say, hey, have you ever lived in a house that's backed up to an agricultural field? Like I'm looking at that as like, hey, that'd be huge, right? I got this great orchard behind. And the real estate agent says, well, here's the thing, right? Yeah, you have this beautiful orchard, but just so you know, they spray 3 times a year with an airplane and the chemicals come down in the backyard. Or when it's harvest time, it gets really dusty.
Exactly.
And that means you're probably going to have to, come due and have window washing. Or, hey, there's a little irrigation ditch, which in the rainy season, turns out that in this area can overflow. So now all of a sudden it's the same, it's information back to the agricultural field. I think I have all the information about what I want. Like, oh, this would be great. I have nobody behind me. But then the agent is the one that helps me interpret that information. And then I can make the decision and say, okay, yeah, there's a trade-off here. And I'm willing to live with that downside of spraying 2 times a year and possible flooding because I want to have this beautiful orchard in my backyard. And I think it's a really, really important point that you raised there.
You're spot on. And a word that I think is often used, I like what you said, interpret, or the word insight is used often, in the literature, this idea of providing our prospects and customers with insights about the information. But it's exactly right. You're interpreting it for them. The research actually shows that the more information a person has about a decision, the worse decision they make, right? So there's this fallacy that, if I just have a bunch of information, and think about it from the prospect's point of view. They're sitting there in front of their computer. They're doing a bunch of research. They're going to all these websites. They're downloading ebooks and case studies, and they're getting calls from 7 different sales reps, and they're in so many marketing automation funnels. Information is not the issue. It's, what do I do with this? Because in the end, I don't want the information. I just want to solve my problem, right? And so if you can be the person who comes in and says, hey, yeah, let me tell you about the field. For example, my backyard is a cemetery. It's fantastic. It's beautiful. I'm being 100% sincere. It's a very large cemetery. It's like a park with stones. It's a nature preserve. There's basically deer and foxes and hawks. We go for walks in it. Now, if you just saw that on a website, you'd be like, I'm not living there. But it's great. So yeah, the ability to interpret this for our customers so that they can make better decisions is key, right? That last part, so they can make a better decision. That's what gets you the business.
Yeah, and I like how you frame that from almost like a consumer purchase standpoint, whether it's like a house or a TV is another great example, right? I mean, we bought a TV about a month ago, first TV we bought in 7 years. We had a TV when my son was born. We got rid of it because we weren't using it. We never had a TV because then all of a sudden we have an iPad and Netflix and we just didn't need a TV, right? We're not big TV people anyway. But then my son's getting older. We like to watch movies and Harry Potter and stuff, and it's just better on a bigger screen.
Very important. So, absolutely.
Yeah, we're gonna dig in, and we're gonna go spend a couple $100 and get a decent TV. Well, like my wife is like, oh, we can go to Costco and there's this TV and that TV, and my head was about to explode with even each brand there's the 55 inch, the 48 inch, and the 42 inch. And then even within those inch, like within 48 inch, there's the Model C and the Model S, and this one does this and this one does that. And I'm just like, I don't know. Like I'm just like paralyzed. Yeah. And it's just a stupid $300-$400 decision here. We're not getting some huge $2,000 wall unit. It's a $400 flat screen, right? And so we finally just like started eliminating stuff. We're like, what's the biggest TV we can get that will fit in the space that we have? That's decision point number one.
Yep.
Right. Like, and we measured it down to the half an inch. We're like, okay, we can't go, if it's 55.5 inches, we can't buy it. If it's 55 inches, we're good, or whatever. Then I don't even remember what the number was. And then the second thing is, then we were like, okay, well, let's just go to Costco and we'll just check out these three. Whatever picture looks the best, we're going to buy it. Like we just shut everything else out as our decision. And then, but the last thing we did look at, the last two models, one was like compatible with, I had like Chromecast, and the other one didn't. Sure. I don't even know what that was, but my wife knew, and she's like, oh, we should do this one. Like, cool. And that, like, we went from like 50 things on the website, every little technical spec around this TV, to like basically three things. Will it fit? How's the picture? Does it have Chromecast? Yes, done. Let's just get in line, get the hell out of Costco.
Right. Well, and there's a word you just used, which I think is really important for sales professionals to remember. Paralysis. You talked about being paralyzed by the decision. So often when I'm talking to sales reps out in the field, and this actually, especially with sales leaders, right? Sales managers, people who are leading sales organizations, your real competition isn't your competition. It's not doing anything, right? It's status quo. It's you throw up your hands and go, you know what? This is too much of a headache. We don't really need a TV. We'll just go out to the movies every once in a while to watch Harry Potter. Your prospects, they're doing the same thing. It gets so overwhelming, they just push it to next quarter, right? And especially because nobody's gotten fired for not making a decision, right? But they've gotten fired for making a bad one. So that's the world that your prospects are living in. You have to recognize that and realize that, hey, if I just send them an email every day, that's not going to help them. Yeah. Giving them some insights and some ways to interpret information, that's going to be really powerful.
Yeah. Well, I think that's like a critical backdrop, because if we want to get to that place where we can be the Sherpa, if we want to be the person that is and we use the word trust. I think that is a word that, there's a spectrum or a continuum there. Maybe it's like it starts with becoming believable, and then eventually gets to someone where I can trust that whatever information you're going to give me, or interpretation of that information, is the right one. So regardless of how you think about that word trust, I think this goes really well into like, how do we create that trust through connections, through networks? Because as you said, especially in the world, even in the old world, it was like swap business cards, and that's networking, bad appetizers at night on Tuesday with a bunch of other people that probably can't buy from me. That was the old networking. Now it's like LinkedIn, and it's so easy to connect on LinkedIn. Like ridiculously easy. LinkedIn, like, oh, here are 1,500 people in your Gmail that aren't connected. Would you like to connect all right now?
Push the button, yeah.
Yeah, push the button, and we all get the spammy messages. And whether it's LinkedIn or meeting somebody at a conference or Instagram, wherever it is that you're meeting people, how do you coach your clients, or how do you coach salespeople or managers to actually use what is construed as like this kind of like icky thing of networking in a way that's actually positive and does build trust that everybody wants?
Yeah, it definitely is. And it has an icky connotation to it. For me, the first thing whenever talking to somebody is to help them understand the value of relationships, right? Because we all have these human beings are very immediate concern focused, right? If you're in sales, I got to hit my quota. Did I hit my call number? Did I do my emails? And especially a lot of organizations these days are being run by people who came up when that worked, right? Sales used to be transactional. It used to be dial for dollars, right? I know that. I came from that environment. That used to work. So the first step is just to understand that relationships have value. And you said there's a spectrum. Trust is a spectrum. We're not trying to be BFFs with everybody. But there's something called the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is this big research survey that comes out every year. You might be familiar with. I think it was in 2018 was the first year that basically trust in everything went down. Government, large companies, NCO, like just people are, not trusting, except for the people that we know, right? The relationships we have. What's the best way of finding out a new product or service? Word of mouth advertising. And so the first step is always to realize that there's value in investing time and energy into our relationships. So going to that networking event is useful. It's a tool. Being on LinkedIn, great tool. Having a cup of coffee or even just a virtual cup of coffee over Zoom, great tool. Sending an email. Putting time into building the relationship is valuable. That statement has to be understood first, right? Because you're not going to get something from it right away. It's like planting a field. You talked about the orchard in the back of the house. You've got to cultivate it. You got to fertilize, and you've got to put pesticide on and water and cultivate that relationship. And you aren't, again, trying to be BFFs with everybody, but you are trying to get to the point where you have earned the right to reach out, to have a conversation, to engage with someone, and to engage in a way where they're willing to listen to what you say. Right? Because, hey, what is really a spam LinkedIn message? It's a message from somebody that could be the exact same thing that a close friend writes, but we just discount it because we're like, this is garbage. I don't know you. I don't trust you. So that's always the first thing, is to understand that, hey, putting some time into this, 10% of our time, 15% of our time, planting the seeds and cultivating them is critical. And then the very short answer to a much longer question is, we all know how to build relationships. Everybody listening to this has a relationship, hopefully. And if not, call me up. We'll take care of that. We'll get you a friend. We'll get you some therapy. I don't know. But we have done that. We've gone to, we were in kindergarten. We made new friends. We have family members. We have significant others. We have friends. The same skills that we use in our quote unquote personal life work in our professional life. It sounds trite, but to be trusted, be trustworthy is something I say, to people. Be a person who helps others, is concerned with others, be a good person. And the world could use a little bit more of that, I think. It would never hurt. And again, that might sound kind of like, a little bit of a tree hugger, happy, hippy dippy answer, but it's true. And it's amazing what happens when you first, again, just invest in the relationship.
Yeah, just for clarification, you said the Edelman, Edelmen, trust barometer?
Yeah, Edelman trust barometer.
Yeah. I just found it. I'll put the link to the show notes because I think
awesome.
I'd not heard of this before, and maybe I've heard it in passing a while ago, but the first time I've actually looked at it, and I think it's a good opportunity that when the world is digging, you can zag, right? If trust is going down everywhere, well, it doesn't mean we should just follow suit and be less trustworthy and do what everyone else is doing. Maybe we can find a way to do the opposite, which is invest. You said 10% of your time, for example. And so going into what you said about, like, maybe it sounds hippy dippy and, unicorns and rainbows. I could just imagine, like, I'm thinking of a couple of my clients right now that, we're working on their outbound campaigns, for example, right? And actually 2 co-founders right now are each doing LinkedIn messaging, and one's doing he's more personable. Mm-hmm. He's the CEO. He's more of the salesperson, and he's doing fewer messages, more personalized. And the other one's the CTO, and he's just more, let's just call it, more analytical, more numbers based. And he's just taking a more cold approach. He's like, well, I'm sending out a lot more, but John's getting better results. And I was like, why do you think that is? Right. So we just had a perfect A/B test right there. And he's like, yeah, you're right. Okay, we'll just do it the way John's doing it. I'm like, cool, that was easy. But for most people, if
only every client saw the light so quickly.
Well, these are good dudes, and they're good guys, and they really, they want to do well, which is great. They're coachable. But I'm also, like, as you were talking about, like, being, creating trust and being trustworthy, I can imagine somebody listening to this and going, like, okay, radar's up. Like, I can send 1,000 emails a day, or I can do kind of cold connections and hit a lot of people. It sounds really expensive from a time standpoint to invest in relationships. So if I connected with 20 people from the conference last week, who I all think are sales leads, it sounds expensive if I have to follow up with them and maybe send them an article or a resource, and maybe you have some specific tips on what to do. So how do you get somebody to understand a cost benefit that naturally gets weighed in their brain of, like, well, I could send 1,000 messages or 10. 1,000 just seems like better.
Well, That's exactly my point, that you actually have to kind of change your perspective on it a little bit. Because one, the sales world for the last generation was so numbers oriented, hustle oriented, success through volume. But also as humans, we see things directly. Like we go, if I'm going to throw this ball X hard, it'll go so far. If I throw it 2X or 10X, because that's the popular one, right? It's going to go 2 or 10 times as far. I think it goes back to that example you used earlier about the two founders. You go, it's not about the effort we're putting in, it's about the results we're trying to drive, right? So if you can make 1,000 phone calls and get 10 appointments and have one sale, and if I can make 10 calls and have 5 appointments and make 2 sales, I win, right? Now, I might not get as much praise in the sales meeting because everyone's like, oh, John made 1,000 phone calls. He's amazing. My paycheck's better. Okay. So I think that's the first step. And then the second is to understand that you're going to spend the time anyways. So always look to spend your time in the most productive ways. Am I saying that, hey, there's no cold outreach, there's no cold call, no, there's absolutely all of that in sales. There's that whole debate between social and cold calling. It's a BS debate that people try to drum up to just create conflict and sell stuff. They're all tools, right? So, but if I'm a sales manager and I'm talking to a salesperson who just went to a conference and had who had met 20 people, got 20 cards of potential, spend the time, right? That's what I'm going to say is, great, those are people who will actually talk to you. Have a conversation, get on that. I would say after conference, you get a decent sales lead. I'm not even saying like they want to buy it. They're like they're in the ballpark, right? They fit your criteria. Reach out to them on LinkedIn, say, hey, love to connect. Find an article or something that is truly valuable to them, right? Based on your conversation. If you want to this is so simple, almost nobody does it, but it puts you so ahead of the pack. Write them a handwritten note. Here's what I ask audiences. How many of you have gotten a handwritten note in the last week? And about 5% of the people will raise their hand. It's the empty inbox, right? So you just stood out. Then say, hey, can we grab a 30-minute phone call? Can we grab a quick Zoom call? If they're local, can I buy you a cup of coffee? Don't go there trying to sell. Go there trying to ask questions, trying to find connections, find ways to help them. I call it networking karma, right? That conversation, you're going to ask a bunch of questions. You might be like, hey, I can really help this person. And then then you say, hey, you know what? You said you have problems with XYZ. We might be able to help. Could we set up a time to talk about that? Or maybe not. And you're just like, hey, would love to stay in touch. It's kind of like dating. Let's get to know each other. And then you now have something like LinkedIn where you can see their posts and they can see yours. And you can engage in a very light way that's not time intensive until 3 months, 6 months, a year down the line, they do become a prospect. I built my business with networking. And even though, yes, there's lots of new people and new prospects that come through the pipeline, there's people I've worked with for a long time. And I've known a long time that I can just call and say, hey, I know you got this problem at your organization. Can you introduce me to so-and-so? And they're like, yeah, sure. Let me do it right now. But I've invested the last 10 years in making that 30-second phone call happen, right? And I think we do a disservice when we do, especially younger salespeople. We don't tell them start investing in your relationships now, so that when you're 50, your business can be done because you're just making a phone call and saying, "Hey, Bill, we've known each other 20 years. Hook a brother up."
Yeah. Well, I think, and I've gotten to that point in my career as well, right? I'm 45. I've been on LinkedIn for 15 years, I guess, 2003, I think, whatever it was when I first got on.
Us early guys, yeah.
Yeah. And so I actually have connections from different parts of my professional life. Like I spent a lot of time in mortgages selling to banks. Mm-hmm. So I've got a whole hundreds of people in the banking sector that I've connected with. I got obviously tons of people in the startup world that I've worked with. I got real estate agents because I used to work at a company called Altos where we sold real estate market reports to agents and brokers. Got a bunch of real estate people. Now, many of those are old contacts. I haven't talked to really most of the banking and real estate people in at least 5 to 6 years. But there are people that on occasion, like if I go to LinkedIn and I see like, oh, so-and-so is connected to Jeff, who's an agent down in San Diego. I'm like, hey, Jeff, I saw that you're connected to this founder, CEO down in San Diego. Do you happen to know him? Oh yeah, he's actually a good friend of mine. So even though I haven't talked to Jeff in like 7 years, I can say, oh, that's cool, because I love what they're doing. And if they want a quick intro, I'd love to have a quick chat. And it's like you said, it's because I've had it in there for a while. But the thing I like this like I just wrote down as a basic 3-step playbook. It's like you meet somebody at a conference, LinkedIn connection, followed up by an article that's valuable, not just from your website because it's the latest post that the marketing department did. And then the handwritten note, right? The handwritten note is, I wrote down, you said, this is the empty inbox.
Yeah.
You think about it, right? You're like, even LinkedIn messaging getting full, email getting full. Nobody, allegedly nobody answers the phone anymore. Voicemail boxes are full. The box that's empty is the actual mail, the snail mail box.
Yeah, 50 cents. That's all it costs you. And I've actually had people, and I'm trying to remember, I think I read a book early in my career that suggested this. Actually, I do know it was Bob Berg. I forget which book, but if you don't know Bob Berg, go read his stuff if you're in sales. This guy's been around for a long time, and he's a class act. His stuff is great. But he had suggested this, and so I made a little card, had it printed up, and it's got my picture on it, my contact info. But I sent them out. I've had people actually tweet pictures of that card that I sent them, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the impact. And all that has to say is, hey, Scott, it was great meeting at the conference. If there's anything I can do, please let me know. Let's keep in touch. Right?
Yep.
That's it. Super simple. But just to do that little bit that other people won't is how you stand out. Yeah,
and it is easy. And the time that it takes to write that note, put it in an envelope, stamp, and I mean, it really isn't that much of a marginal difference from sending an email. And I mean, I've done this in the past. I still do it. I'll send people, signed copies of the book with a little note in the book. Yep. And yeah, you got to go down to the FedEx office, but I'll go down there with like 10 books. I just like over this, like, this is the 10 people this week that get a book, and here's why. And it probably takes me, an hour to do the handwritten notes inside the book, and then another hour to get to FedEx, drop it off, get the addresses and all that stuff. But it does make a huge difference for people. So whether it's like, for me, it's a book, it could just be a handwritten card. I do see impact. And I've had the same thing. I've had people take a picture and put it on LinkedIn, like, oh my God, I can't believe I just got a copy of this.
Exactly. Yeah. I know Dee down at my local post office. Come in, she just looks, oh, got some more books? I'm like, sure do, Dee.
Yeah. So you do the same thing. Yeah.
Yep.
And the article that's valuable. So I like this a lot. And especially, I feel like my experience is, if you send an article that's not yours or from your team, it actually carries more weight. Like if I send an article that our marketing team published, then it seems, even if I'm attempting to be like genuine and helpful, it seems like, it's actually a backdoor. And even nowadays, some people, I always think about this, like, okay, if I click this link, am I going to get a Facebook pixel on me? And the next time I go to Facebook, am I going to get an ad? And it happened. I'm like, I don't even want to click on this link because it's going to this person's website. And I don't even want to do it. Right. And I think that's going through a lot of people's heads nowadays. Or if I download this thing, that means I'm going to get put on some email list. God knows what happens there. So one of the things I used to do when I was at Altos, because we did housing market data, I was also a professor, adjunct professor. So I had access to all these academic journals, online journals, JSTOR and these other. So what I do is I had like a list of housing market articles related to like price and inventory and days on market, like research from people at Harvard or Yale.
Right.
And I used to send links to those articles. I'm like, oh, by the way, you probably haven't seen this article because it's an academic journal, but I just came across it. I thought you'd be interested. And like that one thing, because it was academic, nobody had seen it. And it was like totally unique. And they're like, holy, like this sales dude is like sending me an article from, the guys at Harvard about housing markets. It totally repositioned how they viewed me. And it was truly like an attempt to be useful to them.
I love that. And yeah, they weren't going to see it. And you just use that word repositioned. It's just, you positioned yourself as, again, that you were being a sales Sherpa without even knowing it. You're going, I want to be somebody who's a resource to you, to help you. Here's something you're not going to find in your normal day to day. It might help. Even if they never read it, to your point, they're like, oh, this is a guy who gets what we're trying to do. So your next interaction is probably going to go better than if you had not sent that.
So another question, I know we've got about 10 minutes or so. I wanted to ask you about something that's in the hyper-connected selling book. And you've got a section of the book, which is goodbye to closing, hello to the next step.
Mm.
And the reason I wanted to bring this up specifically around this part of the conversation is that let's say we do a good job of connecting with people. We send a request, we send a good article, we send a handwritten note, we build some trust. We're doing, I'm doing that stuff that you just told me to do. It's like, okay, now what? How do I get from, okay, right. Now I've actually positioned myself as being helpful and a resource and a Sherpa, but that's only useful if I can get them into some kind of meaningful sales conversation, right?
Right.
And it feels like this strategy, this idea of like hello to the next step, is something that you kind of trademarked it. And I thought it'd be useful to kind of talk about that segue, because getting the connections, building trust is one thing, but then you have to actually do something with them if we want to sell stuff.
Just because we're not closing anymore doesn't mean we're not asking. Or rather, I should say, I wanted to get salespeople away from this very finite, bounded idea of closing. I said I came up in the direct sales world. We had a 7-step sales process. Number 7, ask for the order, right? So it was like, you do this, you do this, you do this, bada boom, bada bing. Hey, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask. Would you like to go ahead and place an order? There is still a need to ask. But if we recognize that the landscape is not necessarily linear anymore, and it's probably going to be a little more stretched out, it's not just a one-call close, we have to realize that at the end of each, let's call it phase, right? To take the sales Sherpa analogy way too far and talk about base camp, right? So to get to each base camp, you have to move to the next step. So you do want to ask, right? You're having some conversations. There is a time where you have to recognize, I think that they're a prospect and we can help them, where you say, hey, Bill, I was thinking about the problems that you're having over at company XYZ. I think we might be able to help. Does it make sense for us to grab a quick 20-minute call to go over that, right? And then you get that call. And then at the end of it, say, hey, I'd love to do probably a more formal pitch, because, you seem to really like this thing that saves 4.5 hours out of your week. Who else do we have to bring into that conversation, right? So you're still having quote unquote closing questions, but the problem with that phrase is closing, it seems like it's the end, right? Like it's just specific, finite. You do, your dog and pony show, ask a question, they say yes or no, maybe deal with some objections, and then you're on to the next one, versus this is just really part of a continuum.
So what that means, that tells me, people use that phrase, always be closing, right? And that's the old, the 80s, whatever that was, Glengarry Glen Ross. Always be closing. Yeah.
Replace, you're fired.
Yeah, exactly. But it's important to then, you're talking about using the trust, like leveraging the trust here. Like if you've gotten to that point where, okay, you have now a real relationship, and you can say, like, hey, based on what you told me, I think we might be able to help. I think that in itself is a very human way. Because if I was talking to my son or talking to my wife or talking to a friend, I would probably speak in that way. Mm-hmm. If I had a friend who said, like, hey, I have this problem, I go, well, and maybe I can help you out on this. Like, if you want, I can come over to your house and help you move that furniture.
Exactly.
And so it's just like proposing it in a way that maybe I can, maybe I can't. And it's just like, we're both kind of on the same side here. Right. Let's see if we can. If we can, awesome. Then we can talk more about how that works. And if not, then that's okay too. But then it becomes a much more human approach to it, as opposed to, okay, based on what you told me, can I show you a demo? No, you can't.
You've got the right job title of my target audience. Can I do a demo for you?
Yeah, exactly.
As you said, it is a much more human way. I think there's always a balancing act. When I talk about being a sales Sherpa, I think to kind of the hardcore sales audience, it does sound like a little, oh, you're just going to be on LinkedIn and sharing content, and that's not how you sell. And I actually think being a sales Sherpa is harder than kind of this old school hustle. I'm not going to think, I'm not going to do anything except for harass people until they say yes. It requires creativity. It requires empathy. It requires looking for great material, just like you sent those academic journal articles to your prospect. It takes some business acumen for you to sometimes read between the lines of what's going on for your prospects, or reading an article about one of their competitors and a challenge they're having, and then going, hey, I should call Sue and be like, hey, Sue, I read this about your competitor. Are you guys having that problem too?
Mm.
But it is much more natural. I often use dating analogies, and it's kind of like if you were talking to somebody, you're single, and you're talking to somebody who's also single, and you express this shared interest in the same band. You would not say, hey, do you want to get married? But you would say, hey, that band is coming to town next week. I got 2 tickets. Would you like to go with me? Right? Like that makes complete sense. And then
that's the next logical step, of progression in that relationship.
Exactly. And that's what we should be looking for. What's the next logical progression? What's the next step we should take in this relationship?
Yeah. And I think it's even, I would say, maybe even more important when you're selling a new product in a new space, like a replacement for an old, outdated process, because it means that our customers need us to know where to go. Like we have to lead them through, because they don't know. They don't have a process for buying software that solves the spreadsheet problem, because they've never had to buy software before, right? So
exactly.
If you can say, well, hey, I don't know if we can help, but if you want, we can take 15 minutes to talk through it. And then if it seems like there's a need, like, hey, if you're up for it, maybe like using your words, like who else should we get involved? Maybe we can do a quick demo to the whole team. And, just so you know, typically at companies like yours, we usually at this point maybe want to ask the IT guy to come in, or ask the head of marketing if she's available, and almost like propose that to them and give them the stepping stones to that next place, because they don't know where to walk.
Right.
So we have to sort of bring them through that. And so I really like the way you like this hello to the next step is just knowing what is the next step that's going to keep the sales moving forward, and not worry about the close, because as soon as you start running to the close is where you fall off the trail.
Yeah, you want them to pull you into it, right? They will. You've done a good job when they're like, "Hey, Scott, can you tell us how we could buy this?" Right? As opposed to
what should we do? What should we do next?
Yeah. Well, and as you even kind of pointed out there, I love that idea of the next stepping stone, because if they don't have a process, if they've not gone through this before, you can take your experience and say, hey, by the way, we were talking with this one client, and what really hung things up was they didn't get the CTO involved early enough. And there's actually some legit technical issues. Should we get them involved now, just to make sure that that's not going to be an issue, so that if this does work, we can kind of implement right away? And that's how you become a true trusted advisor to somebody, as opposed to just a salesperson.
Dude, this has been awesome, man. I could do this all day.
For sure.
So I want to, just for the folks listening, we mentioned a couple of the books, especially, the different versions of the networking in the 21st century, and then hyper-connected selling. I've been paging through hyper-connected selling, and just like the table of contents, I like how you've laid this out, where you've got this chapter about the 4 stages of sales evolution, the end of information asymmetry, the buyer's journey, and gate crasher to guide. And that's where you talk about becoming a sales Sherpa. And the book just kind of walks through this human connection, how linear sales processes are dead. I think it's a really well laid out book that it almost brings people through. Well, it's just like you're trying to introduce this concept to people that we use that word icky. It's just like, networking is time intensive. I don't know if I want to do it. My investors are on me to get more customers, and I've got all these automation tools that make it so easy to just blast 1,000 emails and put people in this 8 email sequence. I'm just going to do that. And I think a lot of times it's just like we talked about, they don't have visibility as to why this is a process. Yeah, there's a time and a place to do the automation. Like you said, you still cold calling, still do it. Outbound, still do it. But investing 10% of your time to go build relationships, I think it's an easy investment. And the thing I like about your book is just sort of walks people through it and kind of really builds the case for doing this. And especially if I'm starting to manage a team, I think it could be a good handbook as hey, this is our thinking, as a company around why we want to spend 10% of your time on networking.
Right.
And here's, sort of giving your team permission to do it instead of just saying do it. Spend more time building relationships. It's like, no, here's why it's important, and here's how to do it. So I just wanted to kind of give you so you didn't have to do any plugging yourself. I think it's a well written, well laid out book.
That was the goal. So I've done well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so how can people, if they want to learn more about the coaching work that you do around the networking and hyper-connected selling, what's the best place for people to go, check you out, get in touch?
Yeah. So,
floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. The best place, I do have a website, davidjpfisher.com. But if you go to davidjpfisher.com/podcast/startup, that's a landing page just for listeners here today. So we got some free resources that you can download that you can start running with this right away. You can find all the books on Amazon, and the best place to get in touch with me is LinkedIn. I am there a lot. LinkedIn.com/in/IamDeepFish, IAMDFISH.
I am Deep Fish.
I am Deep Fish. Yep. Picked up a nickname while playing in a band, and it's stuck with me ever since.
I like that. That's pretty unique. Yeah, and on your website, like I was obviously spent some time in there. I mean, aside from the book, there's several other resources available that people can download. So definitely recommend checking it out.
And 300 articles there too. So.
Yeah, dude, I was on your blog and I went to the bottom and like, oh, I'm gonna scroll back and maybe find an article or two from a couple of years ago. It's like, you know, the numbers, it's like 1, 2, 3, ... It goes to 68. I'm like, holy crap. This dude's, so I immediately jumped to 68 and you've got articles that are like now 10 years old and some of them you've even updated since then and stuff like that. That was pretty cool. I'm like, yeah, dude, this is like a wealth of content on here. So good on you for staying consistent.
I try.
I should have, you know, for somebody who wrote a haiku a day for a year about Chicago, you know, what's blogging? That's easy.
I can't rely on my good looks, so I have to rely on consistency.
Damn. Mom always said I had a face for radio. So, well, dude, it's really good having this jam session with you. We'll definitely put the links to the URLs that you just shared in the show notes. And then once we have the episode all ready to go, we'll send out some press release or summary emails and stuff that you can use to share it with your tribe as well. So if there's anything we do in the meantime, please let me know.
Sounds great.
Dude, so good to talk to you. We'll have to do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite, and we'll stay in touch.
All right, man. See you later, David. All right, bye.